Afternoon, folks. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School. And if you're watching this video, you know that Self-Reliance Outfitters was one of the sponsors of the show Extracted. Most of the stainless steel that you see on that show, in fact, probably all of the stainless steel and cookware that you see on that show came from selfrelianceoutfitters.com. And it is branded the Pathfinder brand. Now, to my AAR of episode number 3, I guess it is now. I go back to the fact that it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, right? It's very easy for someone to look at what they're doing, look at what the families are doing in retrospect and say, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, I would do this, I would do that. And it's easy to do when you're not in the heat of the moment and in the situation. Now, we should caveat all of this with the fact that everyone should understand by now that the contestants of this show are supposed to have no, I repeat, no survival training. Now, obviously, a couple of the contestants are doing a little better than others. So maybe they have some camping experience. Maybe they have watched more YouTube videos or read more books. I don't know. But they're not supposed to have any formal survival training. And one thing that I can tell you that I see from the show that tells me that none of them do have formal survival training is that the same recurring thing happens every episode that I see. And I think we're on day 6 or 7 by now. And I still see people relighting fires from start, putting new kindling and new pieces of wood on there, whether they're broken crates or whatever they are, and using more resources to start fires again and again and again and again. There's firewood everywhere around that area. They have saws now, they have axes now. There's absolutely no reason to not have a huge bank of firewood sitting there and have a fire going 24/7. Because if you have to boil the water you're drinking, you're gonna need that fire anyway sooner or later. If for some reason, like in this episode, you happen to get food, you're gonna need fire to cook it with. You may need fire for warmth. You may need to protect that fire somehow in case it begins to rain like it did again in this episode. So those are all things that tell me there's no real experienced survivalists on this show, or they would know better, right? And that's not to say that these guys are doing something wrong. They're doing something they've never learned. They're letting fires go out when they shouldn't. So fire management is a huge part of this deal. Now, all right, so let's go on to some of the things that happened on the show, right? So first things first, we had a situation where a map was shown to the people in the support groups, and they were supposed to memorize this map within 30 seconds or a minute, and then they had to write a map or draw a map for their contestant to be able to find a deer carcass. So we'll start with that exercise, okay? 30 seconds is a very short amount of time to try to memorize a map that you may have never seen before. However, I saw that they did have maps in front of them with things not marked on them necessarily like the one on the screen was. They had maps they could look at. So for me, and again, experience talking here, so I'm not faulting anyone. I'm talking about what's the better way to do things, all right, if it were me. I'm looking at this map, I have 30 seconds to remember it. What I'm trying to remember is what the location is of that deer carcass. So the only thing I really want to know is what's the direction and any major feature involved. Okay, so that tells me it's south and it is west. And I have to cross water to get to it. From there, I'm going to try to remember anything and everything that's major around that. Those 3 things are absolutely key. It's in a south and then west direction, and you have to cross water to get to it. At least then they're going in the right direction, most likely, as long as they're using the sun or something to navigate with, because again, I didn't see any compasses on the show. And I have seen some gear that I did not see them get. I saw some ground pads and accordion pads and things like that on the show that we never saw them receive. So I'm not sure how they got those. Maybe they got them right off the bat and we just didn't know it. Or maybe it was in the shelter kits that they got from the beach and we just didn't know it. But I never saw those pads appear until really last night. I think I might have caught a glimpse of one in an episode before and wasn't sure, but last night I definitely saw an accordion mat. So there is some kind of insulation from the ground that most of these people would have. But there again, back to the map, right? Sorry about that, I got on a little bit of a tangent. South, west, that's what I need to remember mostly. And I've got to cross water to get to it, and the carcass is by a large lake. Those 4 pieces of information right there really are enough. As long as I can determine what direction I'm traveling as a contestant, those 4 things should be enough. Anything beyond that is just smoke-filled coffee house crap that is not going to be necessary for anybody that's on the ground. right? You don't have any exact distance you can give them. They probably have no idea what pace counting is to know an exact distance. All you really have is distance, direction, and landmarks. So you have south, west, cross water, by a big pond. Boom, it's that simple. That's the only thing they need to know, all right? That would have been my take on the memorization exercise itself. Now, let's talk about the deer carcass, okay? Obviously, people got to the deer carcass fairly quickly because they had pretty good directions, evidently, or a pretty good sense of direction to travel to it, and they got to the deer carcass first. What do you do in that scenario with that deer carcass? It looked to me like the show stated that whoever gets to the carcass first gets the choice of meat, and everybody else gets what's left. So if I get to that carcass first, number one, I want to use my knife as little as humanly possible because I don't want to take a chance on injury. At least if I'm already tired, if I'm already in a hurry, that's all out the window. You don't do those things in a real survival scenario if you can help it. So what was the best course of action in my mind? In my mind, the best course of action would have been to cut off an entire hindquarter with your knife, break it off the ball socket, see you later, back to camp. At camp, I can take the time to skin that off, get the choice piece of meat, debone it, and I've got a whole hindquarter of meat that I can put into my bear can. One of the guys put their bear canister in the creek to keep the meat cold. That's a good idea. But again, if you've got fire and you've got a good fire, preservation of that meat is important. Get that stuff over a fire, get it smoking, get it dried out, and then it's easier to store than it's going to be to keep it in that bear can all the time and keep it, from washing away down the stream if you're trying to keep it cold and all those types of things. And these are just hindsight 2020, right? What would somebody do who knew a little bit more about what they were doing? It's not that they did anything wrong. It's not that I'm faulting them for what they did. I'm saying these are the things that could have been done better, right? So instead of messing around, opening up the gut of that deer and having to smell that nasty, rotten gut material, taking a chance on piercing the gut and tainting the meat, shave a hindquarter off that bad boy, see you later, right? There's still 4 of those left. You got 4 legs on that thing. So you get 2 front quarters, 2 hindquarters without ever opening that deer up. Most of the fat content, which you're going to need in that deer, is in the rump area anyway. So cutting off those hindquarters, that's where it's all at, right? Don't mess around with your knife, especially a brand new, very, very sharp knife, when you're tired, when you're in a hurry, because that's when you end up making problems for yourself by causing injury. I didn't see that happen, and that's great that it didn't happen, but it could have very easily happened, and it could have been a much easier job and certainly more pleasant to get meat off of that animal and take more of it for yourself to just cut a hindquarter and go, all right? Enough said on that. Now let's talk about the last situation in that show last night where they had to pick 2 teams to drop out of a supply drop that basically amounted to hot chocolate, short-lived resource of maybe a morale boost, and a pair of wool socks. Now, wool socks were the most important thing in there because they were dry, obviously. A lot of those folks have wet clothes, and that goes right back to the whole fire thing, right? Fire management, fire management, fire management. You've got a way to dry clothes out if you can keep a fire going, and then you can dry your clothes out before you go to bed, and you don't have to go to bed with wet socks, wet pants, wet everything, and take a chance on getting too cold. But 2 teams had to drop out of that challenge. Now, do I agree with the teams that dropped out? I kind of do in a way because, again, those 2 teams were doing fairly well compared to the rest. So I think they made the right decision to drop out. Do I think there should have been a big argument over who was going to drop out? And then all of a sudden, you win the argument, and you win the supplies for your contestant, and then you eject them or extract them in 5 minutes later? That is pretty questionable in my mind because now you've taken resource away from someone who's going to use them and given them to someone who's leaving, right? Again, not faulting the contestant because they have no way of knowing. But the people in the actual situation that are doing the bartering, if you know in the back of your mind you're ready to extract this person, giving them more supplies is not, okay, let's make this deal and then we'll extract them. It's let them get those supplies. Let them see what that does to their morale, to their energy level, to those type of things, and let that stew for a little while. And then if you want to extract them, that's fine. But to do that, number one, in front of all the other contestant support teams really is a bad thing. for the morale in general of the teams. And I think you're going to see coming episodes where these guys are going to start to spat amongst themselves in that headquarters area pretty bad. And the contestants really don't have any contact with each other, any way of knowing what's going on, other than like meeting up quick at that carcass and maybe talking over a few things and like that. That's pretty much all we've seen so far of contestant interaction, right? So all we know is they hear what's on the loudspeaker, and everything that goes on in the headquarters is just between all the families, and they don't know what's happening. So when they get an empty box of supplies, like a couple of them did last night, they're like, well, you didn't send me anything. But they don't realize that there was negotiations going on for that, and that's part of the head game of the show, right? Here's my box. I'm expecting supplies. I open it up, and it's empty. Well, it's empty, but you still got supplies because you got dry firewood with that crate. That's my personal opinion. Glass half full, right? So we'll see what happens next week. That's just my quick AAR assessment of this week, and I appreciate your views, and I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business. If you're curious about the gear that's being carried in stainless steel cookware on Extracted, and I see a lot of them using it on a daily basis. I've heard from some of them after the show that said they use it on a daily basis. I would go to selfrelianceoutfitters.com, and you can find all of our Pathfinder branded stainless steel gear at that location, as well as if you want some survival training for yourself, you can come to the Pathfinder School in Southeast Ohio, and those classes are listed under survival training on the website at selfrelianceoutfitters.com as well. We teach classes all year round, from intro to basic to intermediate to advanced level survival, intensive navigation, ropes and rigging, wild edible and medicinal plants. We have a wilderness first aid certification course that is a Red Cross certification, and we teach wilderness cooking and folk skills and things like that, as well as Bushcraft 101. So if you're interested in those courses, you can check them out at selfrelianceoutfitters.com under the training tab. Until the next time, thanks for your views, guys.